Hey guys, what's going on? Well, do you know what time it is? That's right, it's Quadrajet time. So, if you've been following my channel, or even if you just not subscribed to me, but you found this video, if you check my video library on YouTube, you'll see that I did quite a few Quadrajet videos several years ago. And the intent with those videos was to try to educate people, because when I did those, I just felt like that there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of conjecture and things like that about quadrajets. There's people that just don't like them, and people that inadvertently spread false information about them and what kind of problems they might cause and things like that. And it's always been my experience that a quadrajet, properly tuned quadrajet, runs is about the closest thing there is to fuel injection. My 86 Chevy truck I have now has a quadrajet just like this one, and it runs excellent at all times. Starts easy at all times. So I still get numerous questions about those quadrajet videos I did, about things that people are having issues with on their cars and carburetors and things like that. So one of them I keep getting a lot of is that the back barrels won't open when they should. So I wanted to go through a few things with this and kind of talk about it and hopefully explain how to check this, because I don't mind at all to answer questions on videos, not at all. But a lot of times it takes an extensive answer, and it may be more than someone wants to actually sit and read through. You know how people tend to be these days. They're a little bit impatient, but it'd be easier for me to just make a video about this. I did a couple way back there that were called How to Debog Your Quadrajet, but may not have touched on enough of these pertinent issues with this one operating anomaly, I guess you could say, if you want to be kind of technocrat about it. But so anyway, Quadrajet is a vacuum mechanical carburetor. So the way it works is you have a two-barrel side of it, and in fact, Rochester at one point developed a two-barrel carburetor that was nothing but a Quadrajet. Just the front half, there was just the front half of this thing, the front two barrels, and that's it. The whole back of it was chopped off, wasn't even there, didn't need it. So they used those on V6s primarily, maybe a few V8s, and then at the very beginning, that thing's called a dual jet. And at the beginning, they had a dual jet that was just simply a Quadrajet body with blanked off air doors back here. So that's a little bit of trivia for you. But this is a four barrel. This is a 77 or 78 Pontiac 400 off a Trans Am or something like that, maybe a Grand Prix, big V8. So it is like a lot of other ones. They all work the same. And so you have the front side of this thing, the two barrel side of it, and then when you stomp that big gas pedal, then the back barrels are supposed to open. If you flip it up carefully, look on the bottom of it, you can see that there's two small primaries up front there to the right, and then there's two big barrels on the secondaries on the left side there. That's what makes that gas needle go down towards E real quick. These things are pretty efficient on the front barrels. They run pretty good. That's why they've developed a dual jet, because it's a pretty efficient carburetor. But anyway, so the thing to remember about this is that those throttle blades there, that's what they're called, those four throttle blades are mechanical, meaning that if you turn this carburetor around carefully and you look on the driver's side of this is where the throttle cable hooks up right here, pulls it backwards. So when this linkage goes backwards like this, sort of, it opens up the front barrels, and then when they get about, I don't know, close, about 45 degrees or so, when they get to that point of their opening travel, then this linkage here pushes back on this little guy right here, and that's what opens the back barrels up at the bottom. So there's a couple things going on. When that starts to open, then the air that's getting pulled in starts to pull on these air doors back here, and it starts to open them up. And they open it wider and wider and wider till the thing, when you have your foot jammed through the firewall, whether it be in a boat or a car or a motorhome or a bus, whatever, then that's what this should look like. Of course, the choke would be open also, but that thing would be wide open. So now this car has been sitting a long time. It's never been rebuilt that I know of, not in years and years, so it's a little sticky. Don't mind that. But people write me on YouTube a lot, and they say that they can't get this thing to kick in. When they stomp the gas, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't go, you know, like you heard earlier. So I want to tell you up front, there's one thing that GM and Rochester always did on these carburetors is they put a lockout, some sort of lockout on the secondaries, as conveniently called a secondary lockout, that is tied into the choke. So if you're one of these crazy people that decides to go out with the engine not even warmed up and punch it to the floor for some reason and abuse it like that, then GM second guessed you. They saw you coming. So what they did is they put a lockout so it won't kick the 4-barrel in, so it'll give your engine another 10 or 20,000 miles of lifespan. So on this one, and most of the later ones after about 1974 or 5 or so, the lockout is down here. So if you look back here, this is the end of here's the back throttle blades, and here's the end of the secondary throttle blade shaft right here. You see it's got a pin in it right here. All right, you see this little arm right here? See it? Okay, well, this thing is affected by the choke position. So when the choke is closed, it pushes on this thing a little bit. And see, it's locked. So if you were to try to, see, that's trying to open them. But this thing's engaged right here. They don't go anywhere. So they're locked closed. And then when the engine warms and the choke warms up, it starts to open, gets it opened up, then this thing moves out of the way. It's supposed to if it's adjusted the right way. And then it lets those things move freely. Okay, so that's very simple. Now, I don't advise trying to take it off because usually we get into this discussion about, well, the thing needs to be adjusted and tuned the right way. If you're in here trying to mess with this thing and try to modify it to work better than it already does, 9 times out of 10, you're going to make it run worse. And 9.9 times out of 10, you're going to screw something up that was working good and is no longer going to work. So that's why I tell people, I know I sound a little forceful about it, a little brusque about this, but don't mess with it, okay? Because when you start, they get into these things, they start taking off linkages and they start taking off these vacuum brakes and stuff like that. They think they're helping it. They're not helping it. They're making it worse. So it's crucial that you adjust the choke on these things and make sure the choke's working. This one's got a hot air choke. You look at the front of it, it's got a connection for a hard line comes up. This one has actual thread-on connection. Some of them just have a push-on where the rubber hoses go, but this one doesn't. It doesn't matter which is which on this because this is a totally hot air actuated choke, which means the engine pulls this thing has actually got, I've explained this before, but I'll go into it again briefly. There comes a train. That's great. But this thing has got a little metered vacuum source in here into the carburetor, so it actually pulls hot air, and that's what opens it. So if this choke is not working right, or you don't have it adjusted right, or you got something going on with it that the choke's not opening all the way, that will keep the 4-barrel from working. If everything's there and not been monkeyed with and not been bent and all that. So some of the earlier carburetors also, instead of having that thing down there, they had a little tab up here that was run off this little lever for the choke plate. It was mounted right here. I think I may have one of those carburetors. Let me look right here. Oops, something fell. No, this is not old enough, but I thought it did. But anyway, they have either or. They don't have both of them. So if If they don't have anything up here holding these flaps closed when it's cold, then they'll have it down here. It's either or. So anyway, that is how that works. And so you always check the choke. The choke will affect how this thing works. So if the choke's out of whack, then this will not work. And then secondary, you get that secondary thing to check. Second thing to check is make sure these things are moving. Sometimes they're frozen up. Sometimes people that kind of butcher English say they're frozed up. And the big thing about this is these choke pull-offs here. They're called vacuum brakes or choke pull-offs, but down through the history of quadrajets, this has been enemy number one to people, to backyard redneck carburetor mechanics, because they see this thing. This one's got two of them. One back here, a rear vacuum brake and a front vacuum brake. All right. And so people see these things and they immediately decide that Rochester couldn't have known what they were doing when they designed this. They could not have known what to do about, that, local Joe in the backyard with his screwdriver and his pliers and his side cutters. He knows a lot better about this than Rochester ever did. So when he gets done taking screws out and taking these things off and bending this and bending that and wiring that closed and wiring that open, then it's going to work 100% better, and that's never the case. It always screws them up, okay? That's just the way it is. It screws them up, so don't do that. Now, people see this. The way this thing works is that it has some of these, like I said, only have one, some have two. If it's got one, then it both dampens the well, let me start at the beginning. This is kind of complicated. Matter of fact, I'm going to turn this thing off and come back when that train is passed because it's going to get noisy. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, the train going by there, if I leave the camera running, all you hear is it picks it up. All you hear is so that's no good. So anyway, we were starting to talk about these vacuum pull-offs, as most people call them. I think Rochester called them a brake, B-R-E-A-K, but it doesn't matter. Call it whatever you want. So this one has two, some only have one. But the purpose of these things is, number one, when the carburetor is cold, the choke plate closes. You see this one, how it's closed up? So it's closed pretty tight. There's an adjustment for this. It's a function of this choke adjustment. Turn it one way or the other, that goes tighter or more loose when it's cold. So the service manual tells you how to adjust that. But with this thing being dead cold, it's shut tight on this one. So what happens is when you start the engine, this is connected to a manifold vacuum source. That's important to remember that. That's what this is right here in the top front corner. You can always put a vacuum gauge on this to find out, to make sure that it's pulling vacuum when it's running at idle. But anyway, that's that. And so this thing, when the engine starts, this thing retracts like this. And see what it did? It cracked open that choke plate just a little bit, because otherwise it's not getting any air, and the thing will just lope and smoke and and it takes forever for it to start running right. So that's why you do that. And this one's actually got a screw on it right here. You can adjust that a little bit also right here. But so that does that. And then this one actually has got two, as I said already, and the rear one on this one also pulls the choke open as well. So they both actually work on the choke. The rear one on this one opens up the choke plate a little more aggressively, but this one will also, sort of like, I guess, kind of a backup. But what this one does, and what people don't like about this, they can't understand it, they think there's no reason for it, is it has this piece of linkage that comes up and it goes to this end of this arm the flaps mount on. See that? And so when this thing's running and it's got, a vacuum to it, then it pulls this thing in and it keeps this thing. When you do that, I've demonstrated this before a couple different times. See, this thing will not open because it's being held closed, and that's on purpose. And so people get so agitated about that, they can't figure out why in the world they would do that. It's got to be hurt performance. Well, what happens is when you punch this thing, you got to take yourself back to you driving a new car, not a 35-year-old truck or car or something like that that's been no telling how many miles on it and all that's been monkeyed with. I'm talking about you're driving just pretend, let's just take ourselves back. Let's say pretend we've just bought a new or fairly new, maybe a low mileage used car, a 1979 Buick Electra with a 4-barrel engine on it. And so this thing is still under warranty. So what would happen is, a carburetor just like this thing holds this closed, so when you punch it to pass somebody, what would happen is, if this thing wasn't here, so this thing wasn't acting on these doors would come open quickly because those engines, they're pretty, relatively powerful engines. And so they'd pull the flaps on pretty quick. And what happened is, when these things are adjusted properly, the flaps open all the way, and then they kind of bounce back like this, and they kind of tend to flutter. Okay. Well, what happens is this thing acts on this, and when you punch it, there's a little split-second delay, so that this thing gets the vacuum source to this goes away because you don't have any manifold vacuum at wide open throttle. So what happens is, you got this thing trying to open, and this thing's letting off of it, and see there, it lets it open up, and then when the vacuum comes back, you let off the accelerator, everything goes back like it was. Punch it again, opens up. So backyard mechanics hate these things for no reason, and these things do not keep it from working. Okay, I don't know how many ways to say that, but don't take all this apart. Don't try to modify it. I'm not even going to tell you how to adjust these things because there's no sense in it. They work perfectly. So that's why that's there. That's called. Somebody's got on to me before. I think I called it a dampener, a damper, something like that. Is a damper. That's what I call it. You can call it whatever you want, but I call it. It's a vacuum damper. So it just cushions the opening of this thing, so it opens smoothly. Because this thing is a little bit intricate. This Quadrajet is, because it has, when these things open, you notice there's a lever right here. You see this little lever? This thing starts to open, it pulls up. You have metering rods that are hanging off the bottom of this that go into these kind of fixed jets in the bottom of the carburetor body down there that are in fuel. So there are a couple things happening. So when this thing starts to open up, then it pulls these things up, and it pulls the metering rods up out of the fixed jets there, and so fuel starts to flow. Okay, so that all has to happen smoothly. You don't want to have things going, all this crap like this going on. You don't need that. That's going to mess. See how bad that would mess. Imagine what your jets are doing in your metering rods, the metering calibration, how all over the map your fuel trim is going for that. So that's why it's imperative this thing opens smoothly. Don't worry about it being delayed like a split second. People obsess over that for no reason. You're going down a rabbit hole with that. Just leave the thing like it was designed. So if it has two of them, leave two of them on it. Leave the rods on it, adjust the choke. Do your due diligence in adjusting the carburetor like the way it's supposed to be done. So people have also, they've claimed to me before, they said that their carburetor, this thing wouldn't retract, or it wouldn't let off, I guess. So it's retracted when it's got manifold vacuum to it, but it's supposed to open, it's supposed to let off like that because it's spring loaded. It's got a spring in there. So if that's actually what's happening, I can understand that because it's just, the way the thing is designed, it's supposed to automatically by default be open. So the only thing I've suggested to people is to make sure that you have the thing connected to manifold vacuum, because manifold vacuum is different from thwarted vacuum. There's been a huge argument about that, but manifold vacuum is present. It is vacuum that is taken from below the primary throttle plate, and we're going to look at that so I can illustrate this. If we turn this thing over, look in here. See if I can get you in a little bit easier, maybe. Hold you by the hand. So if we look in here, at this carburetor, you see there right in that bore, you see there's a slot right there, a vertical slot. Okay, that is a manifold vacuum source, because that is manifold vacuum. This vacuum is taken from below the throttle plate, which means this way. We're looking upside down. So in here, when you open this throttle up there, you'll also notice, look in there, you see that one that's horizontal? You see it just got uncovered? All right, that's ported vacuum, because that's a ported vacuum source, because that means that ported vacuum is a vacuum signal that is taken from a spot that is above the throttle plate. So without getting too far into that, I'm trying to confuse people, or not trying to confuse people, then we're just going to leave it at that. So these things have to run off a manifold vacuum. That means if the engine is running and you have a vacuum line connected right here, it should read manifold vacuum, which is 15, 16 inches of vacuum. This I can tell you without trying to confuse you, but on a Quadrajet, this port right here at the front left, this is the driver's side, this is the front of the carburetor, that is always a ported vacuum source. So don't hook one of these things to ported vacuum, because that could, disrupt the way they operate. Another thing too on these things is that keep in mind that this is your air horn that comes off, obviously. But these carburetors also have a couple things going on with the secondary side as far as fuel metering goes. I'll take it back off here again. So when you punch this thing, it starts to open the secondary air doors out here. It has two things going on. It has some pullover enrichment going on, which means it's fuel that is just kind of like an accelerator pump shot, which does not run off the accelerator pump. It's done by the vacuum signal going by here, so to speak. And then you have the secondary fuel supply. So first thing, let's look at this. If we look back at this carburetor again, if you look in here, you see that little hole that's right there at the front leading edge of that flap. That's your pullover enrichment. Now they're in different positions, and so they're different sizes. Some of them are huge, like this one, because it was on a performance engine. Some are small, down lower. You can't see them when the flap's closed. But it doesn't matter, because they do the same thing. So when this thing starts to open up, you see what happens? This flap comes up and exposes it to a vacuum signal. So it pulls fuel out of that. Right through this little passage, pulls fuel, like a little extra shot of fuel right there. So it just kind of fills the hole there before the secondary side of the carburetor starts operating fully, which that comes out of these. See those big tubes right there? You can't see them on that side, but those tubes there, that's your fuel. See how large those are? So that's what those do right there. That's your secondary fuel supply nozzles, I guess you could call them. But anyway, so this is kind of like it just keeps there being a flat spot. So that's something to check. You want to make sure that these things are working right. And one thing to remember, there's quite a few things to remember. It's not that simple on these things. I mean, they're a great carburetor, but they're not an Edelbrock that you just pull off the shelf and slap on there. They're not that simple. But you need to, cover all the basics that I've already explained to you. And then the last thing, if this thing won't run right off the secondaries, because people, I have to understand that people have different ways of explaining things. They may say it may not kick in when they really mean it's trying to kick in. It's just not running right. But if you have this thing working and you know for a fact that the throttle blades are opening, the flaps are opening, they're trying to open, they're not being restricted, it's not stuck. There's nothing like that going on, but it's just not running right. It's just, you step on the accelerator and you hear more laboring than you hear any four-barrel action, then I always suspect that you've got like maybe one of these fuel supply tubes that sticks in the bottom of this air horn. You ever take it off and look, there's like 4 of them across there. Two fuel supplies, and then 2 for each of these, 1 for each of these pullover enrichment. So if those things ever fall out, like if one of them falls out on one side or all of them or any combination, then this thing, if the pullover enrichment tube, either of those ever fall out into the bottom of the float bowl, then it tends to have a little bit of a stumble. because that fuel I told you about is not flowing like it should. But if the fuel supply tubes, the pickup tubes there, if they ever fall out, then this thing will not run off the secondary side. It'll just fall flat on its face no matter what you do. It won't run. So, I mean, it's just nothing there. You floor it and it's just, you'll know it. So I always advise people, if you got one that looks like this one does and it's been in service for a long time and it's not running just perfectly, you need to take it apart and go through it and clean it up and make sure everything's unstuck and the tubes are where they need to be. So there's some good books out there about working on these things. There's a Quadrajet book that shows how to do anything you want to do to these things. So that's what I would suggest you do, guys. If you got one of these that doesn't just kick right in and go, and I mean, I'm talking about, I kind of didn't finish my point a while ago. I said if you bought a new Pontiac or Buick or Chevy or something like that with a 4-barrel Quadrajet on it, or a used one with not many miles on it, under warranty, whatever, you would not stand for this thing having a jerk in it whenever you punch the accelerator. You would want, people back then were like they are now. When they step on the gas pedal, they want the thing to go perfectly. That's the way people are, and I would too. So that's why GM went through all this. That's why they dampened this thing just a little bit. Dampen it, whatever. Don't say anything. Don't say it. But anyway, that's why they went to all this, to make this thing work smoothly. So my plea to you is don't screw it up and don't second guess them, okay? Because when you take off this stuff that they carefully engineered to make it work well and unobtrusively and invisibly, when you take all this off or you start messing with it, then every time you hit the accelerator and try to kick it in and go, take off, it's going to bog. It is going to bog. It's going to do it. And then you're going to be scratching your head wondering, why in the world is it doing that? Because I fixed it. I took all that claptrap off. It's fixed. Why is it doing that? You didn't fix it. You screwed it up. So, golly, everything in the world's against me. I don't know why that cut off like that. But anyway, guys, it's been fun talking to you about these Quadrajets again. I never have lost my passion for the good old Quadrajet, even though I've been on to other things and working on different projects and had different cars. I've always kept my Quadrajets in a safe place, not far away. And maybe one day we'll get something, if everything works out okay, then we'll come back full circle and have something with a Quadrajet on it. I have the truck out there, but that truck is not a powerful vehicle, and it is elderly and not, the engine runs good in it, but I don't want to make it sling something out of it that should stay inside the engine by running it hard, so I don't mess with that truck. I don't kick it hard and ramrod it around. Just don't do that. So maybe down the road, literally, down the road, we'll get something that we can mess with Quadrajets and really burn some tires off with. I hope so. I miss it. So, all right. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, but watch the video. I hope you watch the video, and because if you ask a question that was answered in the video, I'm going to know you didn't watch the video. So, thank you much. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.